What is going on, everyone? So I have this kind of good trend going of just like reviewing these devices in the later part of 2018, and there's really no point in talking about like devices we haven't gotten yet. So let's go ahead and take a step back and talk about some devices that we've actually already reviewed for this year, but talk about in the later part just because a lot of things have changed since that initial review. We're talking brand new iPhones and a brand new OS version as well. So in this specific video, we're going to be talking about the iPhone 7 Plus. And a huge reason why I like the 7 Plus and why I kind of have feelings for it is because I had it as a daily driver for a minute. So I had it for probably like a couple months, and it was my last daily driver before I bought the iPhone 10. And I had a very, very, very good time with it. My review for it is very positive. I really had no problems with it, but that's not to say problems didn't exist for this thing. I'll get into that in a second. But looking around the body, it's the pretty familiar design as we know. This was actually the first iPhone to have a dual camera setup. So on the back, we do have two cameras, which is really, really nice. And I still think this camera is very, very good, but we'll get into that in a second. But the front is a little bit changed as well. Going from the 6S Plus to the 7 Plus, there's a little bit of difference. The top earpiece is actually now a speaker. The bottom home button is actually virtual, a vibration motor, and we don't have a headphone jack. So that does kind of suck a little bit. To a lot of people, that might be a downgrade or whatever. But honestly, once you upgrade to a phone that doesn't have a headphone jack, which is kind of a downgrade if you think about it, you really get used to it in like a matter of like days. It's not that big of a deal. One thing about this phone though is that I had the jet black version of it, and now I have the matte black, but before I had the jet black version, and that thing was, I think that was the greatest color theme of any iPhone ever. Even the gold iPhone XS, I think the jet black version of the iPhone 7 Plus was something else, and I wish Apple would go back to a jet black version, because that thing, like, I don't know any phone that looks as good as that jet black version, but that was a thing and I literally enjoyed it. And like I said, it had the home button that was kind of like a vibration motor. It wasn't an actual button, and that could be a con for a lot of people. Now, if I made this initial review, let's say I bought it like the day after, and like I made a review like back like a year or two ago, then it would be one thing. But the fact that we are so down the line of this phone, you know, Apple is still making it, but people really aren't buying it as often. And because of that, and because of the home button, Apple actually made this phone somewhat hard to repair. And if you're planning on getting this phone now, you're probably going to get it used. And if you fix the screen yourself, let's say you crack the screen or whatever, if you replace the screen yourself or a third party fixes it, not only will the home button not work, you won't be able to click it in, but Touch ID will not work either. And a lot of people have said before that, oh, if you keep the same motherboard, this and that will work. But that's not the case. If you replace any part of the screen, that'll happen. You actually have to go into the Apple store to fix it, which really does suck, because like the whole kind of thrill for me of getting a used device is saving as much money. And if there's a problem with it, I can fix it myself. But Apple really kind of hindered it here, which is not that big of a deal. I mean, how many times you're going to crack your phone? But if it does happen, or if you're planning on getting a used phone that has a cracked screen, such as the 7 Plus, just know that that will be the case. Unless you fix it through Apple, then it's going to be a different story. But that is kind of something, I mean, looking at the later part of 2018 and going forward, that is something to kind of keep in mind with this device. But the screen is 5.5 inches, pretty good. It's 1080p. You're not going to really have too many complaints with it. It's not 4K, it's not AMOLED, so it's not going to look as good as those displays. But when I use this phone as a daily driver, I was never thinking to myself like, oh, this screen doesn't look as good. It's not this, is that. I mean, I thought it was perfectly fine. So if you're planning on getting it, just know that the screen is very, very decent for what you're getting, for what you're paying for actually. The screen also has Force Touch and all those cool little things. Now, a huge part of getting a phone, and especially an iPhone, is the software updates. And this phone actually started off getting iOS 10.0.1, and right now it's upgradable to iOS 12. So this phone actually came out in 2016, which makes sense, iOS 10. So now it's going to get all of iOS 12. It's going to get all of iOS 13, and I believe it's going to get all of iOS 14 as well. And at that point, Apple's going to make a decision once iOS 14 does come out, whether they're going to extend it out a year or they're going to keep it at iOS 14. But I guarantee you right now, this phone is getting iOS 14 100%. I don't really see a reason for it not to be getting it, because it should get about 5 years of iOS updates. But sometimes they do extend it. If the version of iOS isn't as good, or if there's a lot of problems with it, usually they'll extend it. Just like how the iPhone 5S, the same thing happened. They might do the same thing with the 7 Plus if iOS 14 is not good. But right now, baseline, you're at least getting all of iOS 12, all of iOS 13, at least 3 more years of support from my knowledge. So I might not be 100% accurate, but I think from what I know and all the iOS devices that I've been testing, I think it's going to get iOS 14. So that's still a couple more years of support. So you're really not going to have any problems there. So if you're scared of like, oh, this phone's going to be outdated, security flaws, this and that, don't worry about that. You still have a couple more years before you even need to start thinking about that. So man, y'all be freaking out for no reason. But in terms of the performance and the specs of this thing, it has the Apple A10 Fusion chip. It has a quad-core CPU clocked at 2.34 gigahertz and 3 gigabytes of RAM. And this was actually the first iPhone that brought 3 gigabytes of RAM. And this was actually the first Plus variant to really differentiate itself from the regular variant. So between the 6 and 6 Plus, really not that much different, just the size. Same thing with the 6S and 6S Plus. But here they actually made a huge difference. So not only was the screen size different, the camera different, but also the performance was different as well. And there was a pretty big gap between the 7 and 7 Plus in terms of performance. And I don't remember if I did a video comparing the performance, but I might have. So check back on my channel. I might link it up here. But the 7 Plus performance is still very, very good. And believe it or not, the iPhone 10 had 3 gigabytes of RAM. The iPhone 8 Plus had 3 gigabytes of RAM. The iPhone 8 actually had 2 gigabytes of RAM. So I'm not going to say which one was faster between those two, but the 7 Plus in terms of performance is still very, very good. And you have to remember that for iOS devices, you don't necessarily need the latest and greatest chipset or this or that. As long as I would say it has 2 gigabytes of RAM, you'll be perfectly fine. You're not going to complain about performance. And the performance of this phone is very, very good. On iOS 12, I don't know if it got speedier or not. I mean, I did have my iPhone 7 Plus throughout all of iOS 11, and I never found it too stable, but I never found it too bad either. I mean, it was pretty bad on my other devices, but my 7 Plus wasn't horrible. But whether you're gaming or whatever, multitasking between heavy apps, you're really not going to find too many problems with it. But do keep in mind, we're still kind of in the early stages of iOS 12, so any of the software problems you might have are probably going to be fixed out within the next release. We're supposed to be getting a release tomorrow, so best believe I'm going to review it on my second channel. If you have a 7 Plus, check out my second channel tomorrow, depending on when you're watching this, so then you can go check out the review and the multi-core score and all that stuff, and the battery test as well. So in terms of performance, you're not going to complain at all. There's a lot of other things to complain about. Like I say, the performance of this phone is definitely not one of them. And now continuing on, we do have dual camera setup. Like I said, there's two 12 megapixel sensors. The one on the left is the main one, and the one on the right is kind of the secondary one. And it allows you to do like things like optical zoom, like it allows you to twice the amount of optical zoom than a regular camera or than a regular iPhone camera. And you also have OIS on the main sensor. And you are able to do a lot of things with this phone that the iPhone 7 or 8 cannot do, such as portrait mode, portrait lighting, like I said, the zoom effect, and those things, depending on who you are, could mean a lot. If you take a lot of close-up photos of single people, or I guess you could do family portraits kind of too, but portrait mode is a really cool little thing that they added, and I really like it a lot. And that's mostly capable, I'm assuming, from the second camera, but I feel like if you had one camera you could do the same effect, but I don't know why they don't do it like that. So photos and everything are going to look perfectly fine. I'm sure the XS and XS Max look better, but you're really, unless you're comparing, you're probably not going to notice that big of a difference. In terms of video resolutions, you are able to shoot 4K on it, and you're able to shoot 1080p up to 120 frames per second. So kind of a little bit of improvement there. Actually, I believe the iPhone 6s Plus could shoot the same video resolutions as well. I don't remember. I could be wrong, but regardless, the video of this thing looks very good. The overall camera quality is very decent, I would say. I'd probably rate it like an 8 out of 10. Like, I don't really have too many complaints about it. On the front camera, 7 megapixels, you're able to shoot 1080p videos on it as well. And I think overall, the camera quality is very, very good, and I have really no complaints at all. Like I said, the XS and XS Max and all these other iPhones that are newer probably do have better cameras, but if you're not comparing them side by side, I don't think you're going to notice that big of a difference, if I'm being like dead honest. So that was pretty interesting. And also continuing on with kind of more hardware, the battery of this phone is actually pretty big. It actually kind of has a smaller battery than the iPhone 6 Plus. It had a 2900 mAh battery, but it was an improvement from the 6S Plus, and it actually has a bigger battery than the iPhone 8 Plus and the iPhone 10 and the iPhone XS, which is pretty crazy. So battery life, honestly, when I had it as a daily driver, I really had no complaints. I was able to get definitely a day out of it. Maybe if I was lucky, I'd probably get a day and a half, but I usually charge my phone by the end of the day. And raw battery life, it's pretty decent. The only bad thing about it is that there's no wireless charging, so maybe that's why I'm not so much into wireless charging, just because my past daily drivers didn't have it, so maybe that's not why I'm in it, I don't know. But in terms of battery life, I think it's one of the pros for this phone. It's definitely not a con. And you are able to still go into Apple if you buy this phone used or whatever. You're able to go into Apple and get it fixed for $30. So I would still kind of recommend it. You're able to check that within the battery health settings in the battery tab. So I would definitely check that out. But this phone is not perfect, okay? I know I kind of hyped it up and stuff, but I ran an analysis not too long ago, and I went to see which iPhone had the most problems according to Reddit posts. So what I did was I went on Reddit, and so if anybody was talking about a hardware problem for their phone, I would go dock it. So if somebody was like, my iPhone 6 is doing this, my iPhone 10 is doing this, and if it was a hardware problem, I docked it into an Excel sheet, and I kind of benchmarked them to see which one had the most complaints. Out of the pool of data that I had, I actually found out that the iPhone 7 and 7 Plus had the most complaints over all the other iPhones that were being posted about. So that tells me one of two things. Either more iPhone 7 and 7 Pluses are out there making that happen, or there actually are more problems with these phones Now that's that, right? And that kind of shocked me too, because my usage of this phone was completely opposite. I had absolutely no problems with this phone at all. And I think it was very stable for being on iOS 11, and I had no complaints about it. So for me personally, like I said, I don't have any problems with it, but I do kind of have to tell you guys, because I don't want you guys making the wrong decision if, you do end up having problems with it. But just know that I didn't necessarily have any issues with it when I had it as a daily driver. So you might hear stories and stuff like that, but just keep in mind that every single person who buys a phone like this is going to have a completely different experience. So that is kind of my 2 cents on it. And some other notable things to note, like I said, you do have a vibration motor for the home button. You have Touch ID too. You do have IP67 dust and water resistance. So you're able to dump it in water 1 meter for up to 30 minutes. So that's pretty good. The screen is not AMOLED, but it's not that big of a deal. You don't have any wireless charging. You don't have a headphone jack, but you do have a stereo speaker effect. Pretty cool. And you're going to get updates for about 3 years now. So is the iPhone 7 Plus worth it in 2018, in the later part of 2018? I would say 100%. I think this phone is worth it more now than it was earlier this year, just because of iOS 12 and because of the price drop. So because the iPhone XS and XS Max came out, and because of the iPhone XR coming out, this price is going to decrease. I would say you might be able to find a 128 gigabyte variant of this for less than $400. You probably found around $300. And if you're in that price range, I would definitely recommend it. I would recommend this over maybe even like an iPhone 8. Definitely recommend it over an iPhone 6s Plus. And this is a very good deal for an iPhone. I will do some more research on the problems that this phone is having, but I think it's safe to recommend, just because a lot of those problems were kind of weird a little bit. But I wouldn't even let that freak you out. From my experience, I've had no problems with it, and I think it's a very decent option, because it's one of those phones that you can get now and you won't have to worry about upgrading or anything, because it's still going to be supported by Apple for at least 3 more years. So I say go for it. You have nothing to lose. And if you hate it so much, you guys can go and upgrade to another phone and sell this one and recoup the money or something. But if you want to pick up an iPhone 7 Plus for the lowest price I can find on Amazon, I'll leave a link to it in the description below. I'd recommend you guys to get it through that, not only because I personally pick it out, but it also helps out the channel too. And it helps us go get more phones and do tests and this and that. So it means so much you guys could do that. And if you ever want to buy anything, just buy it through that link. It'll help us out. But that is pretty much it. If you guys have any questions or anything like that, leave it down in the comment section below. Hit that like button. That'll mean so much. But definitely hit that subscribe button. Every single subscriber we get really does count, so it'll mean so much if you guys could hit that. Also check out the other links down in the description as well. My Twitter, my Instagram, my second channel, Lo-Fi Alpaca. Make sure you guys subscribe to that. I do a lot more iOS reviews and iOS talks and battery tests on all the Plus variants and even the regular variants sometimes. But once a new iOS release comes out, if you want to know the battery life, health, or speed comparison or anything for that for the Plus variants, definitely check out that second channel. That's where I'm going to do most of that stuff. But also check out the other links down in the description, like I said. But more importantly than everything else, I love every single one of you guys. Hopefully I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace out till then.